the world champion of 1982, Keke Rosberg.
Mansell finishes, and he's world champion. Damon Hill, world champion.
Williams Grand Prix. If they're not your favourite Formula One team, they're probably your second. All down to the challenges they've faced, the battles that they've won, led by a true legend of Formula One, Sir Frank Williams.
Fans used to come out and surround the car, desperate for Dad's autograph and to have pictures taken with him. And we used to sit there, Johnny and I, just thinking, wow, that's our dad.
Frank's enthusiasm for Formula One and motor racing has always been infectious.
The expectation, the anticipation of where they would cross the line on a Sunday afternoon, that's what I think he lives for.
Sir Frank Williams became a Grand Prix legend the hard way. The battle for finance and survival, as big a challenge as the battle for success on the track. There was also the battle for personal survival, after a car accident in 1986 left him paralysed from the neck down. He not only came to terms with his condition, but in partnership with Patrick Head, he then guided Williams to its greatest achievements. Over 100 race victories, 9 Constructors' Championships and 7 Drivers' titles. But this is certainly not a final total. With daughter Claire now part of the senior management, Williams are building for the future, but her inspirational father is still at the helm. So Frank, take us back right to the beginning. What first enthused you about motorsport and what turned you into a fan?
I'd been sent to a Roman Catholic boarding school in Dumfries in South West Scotland. It was 159 Scots, 149 English. And it really was almost wall-to-wall aggravation of war in the competition, the classroom, rugby, football, athletics. And at that time, a Scottish team called Ecuria Cos were doing spectacularly well at Le Mans with their Jaguar cars. And of course, the Scots found that success down the English very strongly. But it did spark an interest, a very strong interest in motorsport from that time on. That was 1955.
And gave you an ambition for what? Engineering, for design, or getting behind the wheel?
No, at that point in time, well, I was still at school and a little while later, just to follow it. But when I left school, I began, as I grew up a bit, obviously, began to earn a living. Then maybe I could afford to go racing myself. I always wanted to. I used to hitchhike a lot of races when I was 16 and 17 and so on. And in fact, I bought a very old, well beaten up Austin A35, which was ex-Graham Hill, and raced that. But that lasted about 3-4 races. I destroyed it at Mallory Park, and that was a temporary end of my racing career.
Was it that crash at Mallory Park that got you the introduction to Piers Courage?
No, it was Jonathan Williams. It was at Mallory Park, a long curve called Gerard's Bend, and I rolled over a few times. And as I was being helped out the back window, and a hand came down from the bank and gave me a hand up, and he said, "I thought I'd be meeting you here sometime." And that was Jonathan Williams. He got off 2 or 3 laps earlier than me at the same corner, you see. And that's where the friendship started.
Yeah, and he was great friends with Piers Courage.
Exactly. That's how I met Piers after that.
Piers Courage was the charismatic young star of a group of like-minded motor racing enthusiasts in Acton and Hornsey in the early 60s. A group that helped each other through the various demands and challenges of the junior formulas and dreamt of glory to come.
It was people by people who were spending more money than they really had just to have the passion of going motor racing. And typically, with a single-seater brigade, of which there were 3 or 4 of us, we would go abroad with our racing cars, normally on the back of a Volkswagen pickup with a sort of covered wagon pickup thing, a canvas cover, and do the tour of Europe, come back in the middle of the summer for all the repairs, refresh the spares and back out again for the second. It was a wonderful 2 or 3 years. Unforgettable, learnt a great deal and made many friends. And of course at that time in the 60s, England was the only place, not Scotland, England was the only place where you could buy a single-seater racing car. So whenever I went racing, lots of the other guys who weren't English, who were from Belgium and France and Italy, said, "When you go back next week, can you get me a set of wheels for this or a spare engine for that?" So I said, "Of course I can," and made quite a big business out of it, which then helped me carry on with racing for 2 or 3 more years, and then I began to operate a Formula 2 car for Piers Courage.
Yes.
In '68. Yeah.
By the late 60s, a foothold had been established in Formula One, and Frank was helping guide the career of Piers Courage, a driver of real star potential. Indeed, Courage was second behind Graham Hill in the 1969 Monaco Grand Prix in a Brabham entered by Williams, and there'd be a further second-place finish at Watkins Glen. But at the Dutch Grand Prix at Zandvoort in 1970, the hugely promising career of Piers Courage came to a premature end.
Piers went off. Maybe it was a puncture, I don't know what it was. No one ever knew, but it was a very high-speed corner. I argued the fastest one, about 150 miles an hour. And there was no guardrail, it was just sandbanks. So the car just dug itself into a sandbank and clearly decelerated. Not much more than the length of this room from 150 to 0. It was the end of the road in every sense of the word, I'm afraid.
Yes.
And then it caught fire.
Yes. You knew the kind of sport that you were involved in. I think Bruce McLaren had lost his life just a short time before.
Three drivers, yeah, that's right.
But what sort of effect did that have on you at that time?
Well, I was very young and I was tearful, very tearful. I mean, everybody adored, literally adored him. He was a very funny person and the most charming, brilliantly amusing, lovely wife, etc. And he was much adored and loved by all the drivers. He was a very special person. You might say he didn't really belong in that community, but he did, in many ways he certainly did, and they just really were delighted he was part of them, and therefore very sad when he was taken away.
They were hard times financially, and
they were very, very difficult, but I mean, when one's youthful, you always are optimistic, and there always was a better day coming tomorrow, I'm sure of that, you know. It worked out in the end.
Well, it did, but at its worst, I mean, we hear lots of stories about what you had to go through, fighting off the bailiffs and working out of a phone box and so on. Some of it probably is the stuff of legend, but how much was actually true and how bad did it actually get?
Well, the bailiffs bit is a bit of legend, but the phone box was for real, because I was cut off for about 3 weeks and the business had to survive. The only way I could just trot down in the rain down the phone box every morning, every night to take the business calls.
Really?
Yeah,
really?
Or to make the business calls.
And sleeping in a van as well? Was
well, that only occurred one unfortunate night where I hadn't paid the rent. But we slept in vans a lot during the summer when we were touring, so it was no big deal.
Dad's always been of the belief that you have to make sacrifices in order to achieve success in life, but he did. You know, he used to, they used to bet him 50p to go and run down naked to the end of the garden where the train line was going past. He would do it because he would do anything in order to just get more money and keep going racing. It was fantastic stories.
But was there a point where you thought, this is it, we're not going to survive this?
I was too young to think that. Too optimistic and too, what is the word, irresponsible.
Frank Williams desperately needed support and allies. The technical support came with the recruitment of a promising engineer and designer named Patrick Head.
Out of the blue, I got a call from a chap that I'd heard of. I hadn't really been that interested in the world of Formula One. But I'd heard of Frank Williams, obviously, being involved in the motor racing world of making production racing cars with Lolas. And I met Frank in the Carlton Towers in London. And Frank was his usual very dapper, very fit, Dougie Hayward suits. And I pulled up in my Renault 4 van, dressed in jeans and a woolen jersey. So I don't think first impressions were that strong on Frank's side. And I was employed as chief designer for Frank Williams Racing. Frank really didn't have much of a clue about what made a race car quick and what didn't. Frank has always been very passionate about Formula One, massively enthusiastic.
But we got on very well. It was clear to me this man with his feet on the ground and clearly very good engineering degree in his pocket. And I haven't looked back to ever since Patrick made this company. It's all about engineering, and all the success. Much of it is down to him and his intelligence.
Financial backing and ultimately control of the team came from the Canadian multimillionaire Walter Wolff. But Wolff-Williams was an ill-fated partnership. The car failed to score a single point in the 1976 season. Along with that, Frank Williams' role in the organisation was seemingly becoming marginalised. It was time to sell up and move on.
Sold him 60%. I should have made it 49%, but he was a much better businessman than I was at the time, certainly. Very tough guy. But I learned a great deal. At the end of the year, we parted, and I started what is now this company.
I think Walter wanted to stop later in the year, but Frank was very, very aware of the benefits of being a member of FOCA. If Walter had stopped and started again at the beginning of each year, they would have been outside FOCA travel payments and that sort of thing. So Frank was the one left with running the team to the end of the year.
So Williams Grand Prix Engineering was born, and crucially Frank had persuaded Patrick Head to join him in the relaunched team that would operate out of the exotic location of a former carpet warehouse in Station Road, Didcot.
I got this call from Frank saying he'd left and was going to run a driver called Patrick Neve, was buying a March, and would I leave and join him? And it was quite a sort of an agonising decision to make, but I did leave Wolf and went and joined Frank, and myself and 2 other employees had to break down the door of Station Road Industrial Estate building, I think Unit 5 Station Road Industrial Estate. It had been a carpet factory and there were all sorts of bits of carpet lying around, and our first job was to clear out the carpets and clean the place up.
It was very hard work, but it was also enjoyable because we knew we were going places. Patrick was just an outstanding engineer, far better than the average. Up till that time, if I remember correctly, the standard of engineering was not particularly high, and Patrick definitely brought in a new level.
There will be some difficult times, but it was at Station Road Didcot that the strength of the partnership became apparent. Patrick Head working on designs that would become the competitive FW06 and then the race-winning FW07. Frank working on the finance, especially one particular deal with a Saudi airline that would underpin the future success of the team.
I've been showing a flat in Harrow with a guy called Charles Crichton Stewart, and he sold cars from HRO in Knightsbridge by cars I meant Ferraris, and he introduced me to several of these young men who thought they would like to be involved in Formula One. These are very wealthy Saudi families, and that was a shortcut to finding some really good sponsorship for the team.
So I think the sponsorship figure was £30,000, which was a fortune in those days, and that got the whole of the rear wing. Frank put our car, the FW06, on the back of the trailer when he knew that Prince Mohammed was staying at the Dorchester, and drove it down to London and had him come out and see the car on the back of the transporter.
You could see the glow in their eyes, and it was done in minutes because of that. If the car hadn't been there, they wouldn't have really got it, but they got it instantly, yeah. And I painted it in Saudi colours anyway to try and convince them.
Who were the characters, the team managers, the sort of grandees of the sport that you really looked up to? Ken Tyrrell, Colin Chapman in
Ken Tyrrell, Colin Chapman, Teddy Mayer around McLaren in those days, the early 70s. Those are the 3 guys that I saw more often who I certainly respected. They were just light years ahead of me in terms of my little team, in terms of performance, so to speak. But they were very good people, and they loved what they did. Colin made very fast racing cars, but Ken was a supreme manager and organiser.
When they all got together in the formative years of FOCA, how chaotic were some of those meetings?
Well, they weren't. They were fun because Bernie was always causing trouble in the jokey way. But there were people who were very dedicated to their work and knew what they were good businessmen generally. In fact, they definitely were good businessmen, all of them. And they got the job done. I think Bernie had a bit of trouble controlling them sometimes, but it worked very well.
And your relationship with Bernie now is as good as it was all those years ago?
It was better in a way, because I've known him for 40 years, something, a long time anyway. And he's always been very helpful to the Williams, very helpful to me and to the Williams team, yeah.
Williams Grand Prix Engineering had become a team with talent and ambition, and at long last the money to back it up. They would also have the other big ingredient, a driver capable of winning them a world championship. The year is 1979. Lotus had dominated the World Championship scene, but the title this season would go to Ferrari. But a British team run by Frank Williams were emerging as a new force. They had a quick car, and they also had a quick and very determined driver in Australian Alan Jones.
Slightly aggressive, pushy, very self-confident, and the thing is, though, it was justified. In a car, it didn't look quite like a racer, a bit too big in a way, big strong man, but he was just very quick and feared nobody. Yeah, that's not to say he was very big-headed, it wasn't that. He just feared nobody, and he got the better of everybody. In what was also a very good car, mind you.
We were of a similar age, and I think I very quickly gained a good understanding of what Alan needed from the car. I wasn't always able to provide it. His discipline was that he didn't confuse you by giving you too many pieces of information, which some drivers have a habit of doing. I wouldn't say it was telepathic, but when you do the same thing over and over again, after a bit, you begin to understand what the guy needs.
He was a real Williams driver, he was a real brute force in the cockpit. And I think they got on, they had the similar mindset. They just were racers, they wanted to go racing, nothing else really mattered.
As the 1979 season unfolded, both Jones and teammate Clay Regazzoni had podium finishes in the FW07. But then some simple modifications were made to tidy up the airflow around the engine, which transformed the car's performance for the next race, which just happened to be the British Grand Prix at Silverstone.
When qualifying came on Friday afternoon, everybody was running around doing, I think, a high 13 or something was the time. Alan went round on his first time lap. I do remember the time, it was an 11:88. So he jumped literally 2 seconds, and all the major players had done their runs, and at that time, nobody'd got quicker than a high 13 or something. And it was pretty remarkable.
I remember thinking there must be something strange going on with the other cars. It was just amazing. But it was a truly superior car. Didn't last forever because other people caught us up quickly. That's the nature of our business. But it was quite an outstanding, a truly unforgettable day, that feeling.
Alan Jones had given Williams its first pole position. Victory was there for the taking, but it would go to Regazzoni, not Jones. Jones had a 25-second lead, only for a water pump failure to put him out of the race. And he'd left the circuit and was not part of the celebrations when Clay Regazzoni gave Frank Williams his first Grand Prix win.
It was tough for Alan, yeah. And the team wanted it to be for Alan, but you don't sort of turn your nose up at that sort of victory because it's not quite the right circumstance.
This was to be the first of the golden eras for Williams. Alan Jones would add 3 further victories in the 1979 season before moving the team on to the ultimate level in 1980. Partnered by Carlos Reutemann, the Constructors' title had already been won for Williams by the time of the Canadian Grand Prix, where the driver's title lay between Jones and an out-of-luck Nelson Piquet.
In the first corner, there was a coming together between Alan and Nelson. That put Nelson into his spare car, which had the qualifying engine in there, and he pulled away again, but after a certain number of laps, the engine blew, and that put Alan into a championship-winning position. Yeah, so we didn't make it easy for ourselves.
But was the feeling around the team of winning that first World Championship what you anticipated, or was it just a few beers with Alan Jones at the end and on we go?
Mansour Ojei rented a room in a hotel and got some food, so we had a bit of a party. I was always much more worried and interested in the next race, so I didn't really get involved in too much celebrating, no. Well,
Patrick always was well ahead of the game in terms of engineering planning. He's worked very hard, and my job, of course, is finding the money. So we sort of often travelled in different directions, but always met at the end, him with the car, me with the dosh.
Nelson Piquet would be world champion in 1981, but the point scoring and consistency of Reutemann and Jones gave Williams another Constructors' title. Alan Jones' retirement at the end of the season paved the way for the talented young Finn Keke Rosberg, and despite winning only 1 Grand Prix in the 1982 season, he became Williams' second world champion driver.
Keke turned up, cigarette, moustache, swaggering along there. I'm king of the castle. If he could do it sideways, he preferred to do it sideways rather than in a more conventional straight-ahead fashion. A brilliant car control.
Keke was a fantastic driver. If he smelt blood, so to speak, i.e. the possibility of a high podium place, he could drive a qualifying lap every lap of the race. Very exciting driver to watch.
There, taking the last corner on the last lap, is the world champion of 1982, Keke Rosberg. He knows it.
The sport was now entering the turbo years, and Williams, despite its success with Ford Cosworth engines, had to react. It needed another of Frank Williams' spectacular deals, but this one didn't require too much work. Honda came to them.
I think it was one of those lucky moments where I came into work one day, or was it in the pits, I can't remember when exactly, but there were several Japanese gentlemen waiting to see me. So I just landed on my feet, or we landed on our feet.
It was a no-brainer for us. We did know we were going to go through quite a lot of pain, which we did in 1984, but it was really a no-brainer decision. But they approached us rather than the other way around. I knew we had to have a driver who had sat in front of a decent turbo engine, and the two that were on the list was Derek Warwick, who had been driving the Renault Turbo, and Nigel Mansell, who also with Lotus had driven the Renault Turbo engine. I do remember saying to Frank, "Come on, Frank, make a decision. I favour Nigel." As it turned out, a very good decision. Nigel was certainly a very unusual personality and needed attention and the sort of proverbial arm around him more than drivers that we'd had before. But you were very well rewarded if you treated him right.
And the first reward came at Brands Hatch in the Grand Prix of Europe in October 1985. A first career victory for Nigel Mansell in the fast-improving FW10. Mansell would follow this up with victory in South Africa, and Keke Rosberg gave the team further success at the final race in Australia. The FW11 promised further improvement for 1986, and extra spice would be added to the driver lineup with the arrival of Nelson Piquet.
He was immensely skilled. He should never have ever doubted his ability to win races. He had the car to win, but I think Nigel, because of his toughness, maybe outpsyched the best out of Nelson. He didn't quite deliver as much as he should have done. That's not to detract from him. If we could do it all over again, I wouldn't be so weak about managing them. They kind of bullied me a bit between them and amongst themselves, and I should have stamped on it. Ken Toe would have stamped on it. Yes. I didn't.
Was it true that Nelson came to your bedside in hospital?
I remember being sort of I opened my eye like that, and one was peering down at me, and I thought, oh yeah, maybe I owe him some money. Let's make sure he's going to get his money. They were difficult to manage, brilliant racing drivers. It didn't quite work out as an harmonious team, because it was never going to be that, unfortunately. But they delivered when they were in their cars.
1986 promised a lot, but 2 weeks before the start of the season, the team were testing at the Paul Ricard circuit in the south of France. When he left the circuit, driving a hire car to the airport, Frank Williams crashed. The car overturned, and he suffered irretrievable damage to his spinal cord. He nearly died several times in the weeks that followed, but despite his survival, he'd be paralysed for life.
You know, I was very young when Dad had his accident. I was 9, Jonathan was 10, my little brother Jamie was only 2. We didn't really know a huge amount, and that was, you know, tantamount to my mum's wanting to ensure that the family didn't change too much and that the dynamic wasn't affected. You know, she did an amazing job that really we only found out about, you know, the stress, the pressure and the turmoil that she was going through when she wrote her amazing book.
Frank, by his own admission, was driving too fast, and he went off the road and into, I think, a ploughed field. And the car, I think, by that time was going very slowly, maybe 10 miles an hour or something. And the car rolled over in this ploughed field, and the roof collapsed. And Frank was in his seatbelts, and the roof came in and whacked him on the top of the head. And he had a compression failure of his vertebrae between C4 and C5. I think the two drivers came down. Nelson could speak French fluently, I think, and they must have rung the hospital, and the ambulance came up. And Frank went down to the hospital. I was speaking to Ginny. I drove over to Frank and Ginny's house. Bernie arranged a plane to fly us down to Marseille.
I remember going and visiting, you know, Dad in hospital when he came back to the UK, and the horrible London hospital that we used to have to go along to, and he was in intensive care, which is, you know, really not an environment that children should go into. But Mum always did a wonderful job of protecting us from, you know, the horrors that were around Dad in the hospital at the time, and really, you know, the quite scary equipment that was keeping Dad alive. And we used to go up, say hello. I used to take him shortbread every week. I didn't realise he couldn't eat it, so it was given to the nurses. You know, they did an amazing job. So really, the experience for us was, you know, Dad has had a car accident, and you know, he's now in a wheelchair, and we all have to adapt and just get on with it. There wasn't much time for, you know, pity, or it was just British stiff upper lip. I think, get on with it, and life's changed, but we'll survive, we'll cope.
Ginny was such a determined character, and was such a passionate supporter of Frank's. She was a very, very determined woman, and Frank was out of it at that time. He was barely conscious. And so Frank literally owes the time after his accident to his wife, and I'm sure he realises that.
It's amazing. He's quite inspirational. I mean, he had his accident in 1986, so I mean, my maths, 27 years? I mean, it's phenomenal. I think he is the longest surviving tetraplegic in the world, but that is, I think, testament to the company that he's created, to the people around him. He's very lucky. He has a very strong support or a team of nurses that look after him, and he has Williams, and it's Williams really that keeps Dad going and, you know, wanting to go racing. He said very famously once that Formula One and winning in racing is like oxygen. It fixes you, and it does for Dad. This is his life, you know, it's what keeps him going, and that's brilliant.
While Frank Williams was coming to terms with his future in a wheelchair, the 1986 season had turned into a tumultuous one for the team on the track. The internal rivalry between Mansell and Piquet was intense, and the campaign came down to a last race decider in Adelaide between Mansell, Piquet and Alain Prost. Critical tyre decisions would decide a race.
Our failure when he was in the championship winning position, I had to make the decision to pull Nelson in, and his tyres may well not have failed. Another few laps and he would have passed him, but Alain Prost won the championship. So there we were, winning the Constructors' Championship by miles, but failing to win the Drivers' Championship. To be fair to Nelson, and Nelson, I got on very well with Nelson. He was a very grown-up person. He never, ever came out and said anything, and never has since. He has never allowed himself the indulgence of saying, I would have won the World Championship if Patrick Head hadn't called me in, which he could very easily have said.
1987, he won the title, though, and there were quite a few complaints from the other side of the garage from Nigel Mansell. Some wonderful races as well. Silverstone in particular, that Mansell-Piquet battle. Do you remember that with affection?
Yes, it was an amazing race. Nigel came in for a pit stop. So after the pit stop, not only did Nigel have new tyres on, but he literally set lap record after lap record after lap record. And there was no question of coming on the radio and saying, don't pass Nelson, Nigel. There were no team orders in that way. And yes, it was a remarkable race with a, you know, wonderful overtaking opportunity, but Nelson's tyres were well stuffed by that point.
Watch Mansell come first to the left, now to the right. He's got the inside line. He is level with Nelson Piquet.
Oh! And Mansell is through.
Mansell has won the British Grand Prix. Nelson Piquet finishes in second place.
The chance that they're actually putting in the guard.
1987 season with another Constructors' title and the Drivers' title for Nelson Piquet was not enough to persuade Honda to stay with Williams. They were keen to go with Ayrton Senna to McLaren, and probably had doubts about Frank Williams' physical ability to lead the team. 1988 was a struggle with a normally aspirated Judd engine, but when the turbocharged era ended, Williams linked up with Renault, and another glorious partnership was formed.
I don't think I could take credit for persuading an enormous company like Renault to come into Formula One. They made that decision. The trick was to get them to come our way, and in fact I remember them turning up here, I think, out of the blue, somewhere a bit out of the blue. Very nice gentleman called Casa. We began to talk about it, and it worked out brilliantly for us.
Yes.
It's a superb partnership.
Yeah. But you did, well, or Patrick or whoever also brought in Adrian Newey. at that time, and how vital an extra ingredient was he?
Well, I mean, all cars have to travel at high speed through a lot of air, and therefore the trick is to use that air to your benefit, best benefit. And Adrian in particular had got that worked out definitely better at that time than any other self-styled aerodynamicist. And that was quite an advantage for us.
It was very clear he was a very intelligent chap, that he was well ahead of us on aero ability. Literally a week after Adrian joined, sat down with him, we divided the car up in terms of different parts, and we produced the FW14.
The all-conquering FW14 would claim 21 pole positions and 17 race wins, mostly in the hands of a returning Nigel Mansell.
He was an amazing driver and very gutsy. Nigel got tagged with this gritty Trier label, and I don't think it was fair at all. And I remember a time at Spa when it had rained and it was drying out and it was patchy for almost until the last 10 minutes of the practice session. Nigel was 6 seconds faster than the next car, and it was sort of frightening to think what he was doing to be 6 seconds faster than the next car. He was a very, very top grade driver, and in my view has to be considered with the Sennas and Prosts of this world. He was an outstanding driver.
In 1991, Senna and McLaren may have claimed the titles, but Mansell and Williams chased them all the way, especially in the second half of the season, one's most memorable battles in Spain.
Wheel-to-wheel stuff. Look at this, they're almost touching. Mansell gets in there.
91 was promising, but 92 was perfection, with victory for Mansell in the first 5 races.
They love him and he loves them. And Nigel Mansell comes out of Luffield 1 into Luffield 2, which is the last corner but one. They're breaking ranks, the Union Jacks are waving, and Nigel Mansell wins the 1992 British Grand Prix in terrific style.
I can't remember specifically, there were so many good results. It was just the whole season was one of, I say, domination, of such success that it was one I cherish.
The title was secured for Mansell by round 11 in Hungary.
Mansell finishes and he's world champion.
But that was as good as it got for the British driver. Renault wanted Prost for Williams, and Mansell was always going to lose out in the negotiations and the politics that followed.
What you were dealing with, it was Nigel, an immensely strong personality. With Alan, you have there an extremely experienced, brilliantly gifted racing driver, quite a different character. One couldn't handle the other, or bend to help the other in either direction, so to speak. It was quite unpleasant sometimes. I did think that Nigel was prepared to share, or have that sort of threat on his shoulder every time he woke up.
Yeah, well, you can understand that. Alain Prost arrives. Alain Prost wins the World Championship for Williams as well. A pleasure to work with, and a season you look back on with affection.
Yes, he was fairly apolitical, if I think I'm right about that. Never lost his temper. Sometimes it's frustrating because you thought he could get more out of the car than he was actually getting, and sometimes he was a delight because he made it all look so easy. His car was rarely sideways. He never seemed to be flustered or phased. He was a pretty calm individual.
The title that Alain Prost won in 1993 on his return to Formula One was a satisfying end to his personal battle with Ayrton Senna. At the end of the season, he retired from the sport. It had become clear that the driver Frank Williams most wanted in his car was Senna himself.
Everyone knew that he wanted to get Ayrton in the cockpit. Ayrton had his first test with Williams in his early career. And I think for Frank it was, an amazing day when he finally signed Ayrton. Frank loves racing drivers. His eyes light up whenever a racing driver walks in the room, and someone like Lewis Hamilton or Ayrton Senna, those guys, for him, he just looks at them like, he's 16 again. He loves it. He has such an enormous amount of respect for what they do in the cockpit.
I think Alain was very nose out of joint by that and thought, I don't need Formula One so much that I have to go in and go through the same anguish as being in the same team as Ayrton Senna.
He was a very determined man. When you spend quite a bit of time talking to him, you realise he was very intelligent. And the more intelligent you are, the better chance you've got of outthinking your rivals. And that is a fact.
You say you spent a lot of time talking. I mean, that was before he sort of came onto the Williams radar. You would talk on the phone. You would meet for.
Well, just meet, just chat or whatever, because he loved motor racing. He was always there all the time. Yeah, he'd appear at your shoulder. He didn't suffer fools. If he liked you, it was clearly partly because he thought you weren't a fool. He could enjoy your company. You know, he's a very high demanding person.
I was in Hungary with Dad. It was over the years he's taken me, when I was starting in 14, 15, he would take me to one extra race in addition to Silverstone, so I would always choose Hungary. But I remember walking into Dad's hotel room about 9:30 at night to say goodnight to Dad, and into connecting doors, walking in my pyjamas and to say goodnight, thinking just Dad would be in the room, and there's Ayrton Senna kind of standing there having a conversation with him, and I was mortified, as he would be as a 14-year-old girl, and your hero who had a massive crush on is there, and there I am in my floral pyjamas.
Frank Williams had the driver he wanted the most and admired the most, but it was a troubled start to the 1994 season. There were no points for Senna in the opening 2 races, and there have been 2 wins for the emerging talent that was Michael Schumacher. There was no doubt that Senna was feeling pressure as the teams assembled for the fateful San Marino Grand Prix at Imola.
I remember the front page of the Autosport, it said Schumacher 20, Senna 0. But it started off very tense, and then Rubens Barrichello's accident, then Ratzenberger's accident on Saturday. It was just very uncomfortable, and Ayrton was doing very little talking. There was very little exchange. There was some worry about the Goodyear tyres as well, because there'd been some cracking on the tyres. It was a very, very tense meeting.
There was one, I can't remember it very clearly, but I remember he said, not long before the start of the race, he was very close to one particular driver, Gerhard. And he was about to get, not long before he got in the car, 20 minutes before he got in the car, he suddenly said, I must go and see Gerhard, and abruptly left and went off to see Gerhard. Bugger.
Yeah.
And then, not long after he came back, got in the car, and off he went down the pit lane.
During the safety car period, 7 laps, there was no, apart from us saying to Ayrton, keep over on the right-hand side on the grid, there was no exchange, although quite certain the radio was working. He didn't say anything to us, and we didn't say anything else to him. And then the accident happened. It was very extraordinary, because we were reported by somebody from the FIA that he'd hurt his arm, that he should be okay for the next race. We had no understanding of what level of accident it was, because when there was a restart, we restarted Damon. Anyway, it was just a very difficult time, and the period afterwards, obviously, in the investigation, which certainly needed to happen. A difficult time for everybody in the team.
After the tragic events of Imola and the loss of Ayrton Senna, the Williams team had to regroup, and the central figure in this process became Damon Hill. Damon had already taken a podium position behind Michael Schumacher in the opening race of the 1994 season. 6 wins were to follow, including the British Grand Prix at Silverstone and an outstanding performance in wet conditions at the penultimate race in Japan.
Damon Hill wins the Japanese Grand Prix and takes his 6th win of the year.
I shouldn't say to my surprise, but he was actually a much better driver than I thought he was. I mean, he was exceptional. He won the championship eventually. And it was also very easy to get on with, worked very hard, and was just very straight-talking without being unpleasant. Very straight-talking, communicative racing driver, which is what we wanted and needed.
Damon was incredible. All of a sudden, really, only just starting his 2nd year in Formula One, he had to step up to team leader in a team that had previously won regular world championships. We hadn't had a driver hurt in our car in any way beforehand, and to have a driver of Ayrton Senna, any driver, killed in one of our cars. So it was all a very difficult time, but I would say Damon played a very big part in helping the team run itself and have at least a level of humour within the team during that period.
The conclusion to the season in Adelaide, and not Michael Schumacher's finest moment, probably. How do you look back on that? And have you ever discussed what happened there with Michael? Or I'm sure you've discussed it with Damon. But
I rarely ever communicated with Michael, you know.
So your view of it is what?
I'd rather say nothing.
Inconsistency cost the team in 1995, but in 1996 it all came together again. Damon Hill and Jacques Villeneuve 1-2 in the championship for Williams. Damon taking the title amidst great tension and emotion in Japan.
And Damon Hill exits the chicane and wins the Japanese Grand Prix. And I've got to stop because I've got a lump in my throat.
Well, he probably realised this is a very good racing car. He probably realised this is a big chance for him.
Because he'd come close before, maybe felt
That's right.
that he deserved it before.
He had a very good engine, he had a very good team around him, led by Patrick. As good his engineering, as good as you can get. I think he felt this is it for me.
And he duly became world champion. And
Yeah.
have to bring it up halfway through the season. You made the decision, the team made the decision that he was going to be replaced for the following year. For what reason? What were the politics behind it? Or?
I've completely forgotten.
So the world champion Damon Hill moved from Williams to Arrows. Heinz-Harald Frentzen had a front row Williams seat as Jacques Villeneuve became the 7th and to this date the last Williams world champion.
He had an unusual way of thinking, an unusual way of looking at life. Spoke his mind, always spoke his mind. Mentally very, very tough. Feared nobody on the track, and generally speaking had the skill to go with it. Bit cocky sometimes. Often thought a bit too often. He thought he knew best, and didn't always want to listen to Patrick. That's why he was very strong-minded like that. But he did not waste our time in the car.
So the best you worked with, and I know you were only with Ayrton for a handful of races, who would you nominate as the best driver you've ever worked with?
Well, I mean, I'm choosing these words. It probably would have been, it probably was Ayrton. Because of the determination. He had great skill, more or less than anybody else. Hard to say, immense determination, with an extraordinarily clever brain. I remember thinking in ensuing years, he almost certainly would have been a president of Brazil. Not just because he was a Grand Prix driver and won races, but extraordinarily with capacity to motivate people and understand what they were thinking before they probably realised what they were thinking. And I don't exaggerate on that last point. You would be very careful when you were dealing with him. Not because he was tricky, but because he was usually ahead of your mind.
They were great years, and how has the sport changed between what we see now and what was happening in the mid-90s and the end of the 80s and the great years for Williams, which hopefully will come again?
Well, I don't think the sport's changed that much. The nature of it is world's best drivers, world's best cars. I don't think fundamentally it's changed. How much the cars are very expensive to operate these days, perhaps unnecessarily so. But they're phenomenal machines. They are so quick, so much power, so quick around the corners. They're just breathtaking. And I've been around looking at it for years, and I still think when a driver goes out, I just think, wow.
This has been a number of years whereby we haven't been competing at the level that, you know, up until the 2000s we were used to competing at. And, you know, Formula One is very competitive, but what's the point in being here if you're not going to win? We don't want to be here to come 8th in the championship.
Frank's knighthood, that came as a bit of a surprise to the family, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. He's so naughty. And my mum was furious about that because, you know, Frank takes those things very seriously. If he's been told by, you know, the palace to not say anything, he's not going to say anything, even to his wife. But it did, and it was, you know, that was really special for Dad to have been knighted. But equally, I think most people were more pleased for my mother to have received the title of Lady Williams after the back of that, because she really was. But yeah, I think it's, you know, it sums up Frank's achievements. Yeah. But I do think, you know, Frank's received a lot of these accolades. You know, the knighthood, he received a CBE, he's received a Légion d'honneur from France for our work with Renault. But Patrick, you know, Patrick hasn't received any of those, and I think that, you know, that's unfortunately hasn't been recognised in the same way.
The enthusiasm for the team is so clear around everyone in motorsport. It was illustrated when Pastor Maldonado won in Spain last year. What kind of a weekend was that for the family as well as the team?
that weekend, really, for us, not having won a race for, I think it was 90 Grand Prix, we hadn't won a race before that for 7 years. And it was Frank's birthday celebration that weekend. He was 70. My whole family were there. We had a lot of friends of the team, you know, friends of the team from over the years that had joined us that weekend to celebrate Frank's 70th. And then Pastor got pole and we won the race.
A new winner in Formula One. It's Pastor Maldonado ahead of Fernando Alonso and Daniel Williams with their first Grand Prix victory since Juan Pablo Montoya in 2004. They realise why they come racing and why they love Formula One.
To have that feeling, to be reminded what it feels like to win a Grand Prix, because it's so special. You know, not to have done it for a long time, you kind of think, wow, God, we've got to do that again. We've just got to keep doing that because, you know, it is addictive. Winning is addictive.
Alex Ferguson retired just a short time ago, and has Frank ever hinted at the future for him?
No. Frank's future is at Williams. Frank's past, present and future will always be Williams F1. He works 7 days a week. So even spending one day at home is quite alien to Frank. Christmas Day particularly is a complete anomaly to him. He doesn't understand it at all. So no, retirement, it's not going to happen. He is Williams. To me anyway, he's Williams.
And there's no reason at all why this team shouldn't come again?
No, I don't think so. It just depends on brain power and determination. Brain power to put it all together, brain power to find the money and the right people.
And you're no Alex Ferguson. You're going to be at the helm for quite some time, are you?
I hope so.
That's good to hear.
Thank you
Frank,
very much.
Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.